Counterarguments and refutations are probably a topic that you guys have some familiarity with. It's a common thing we do in essays. But again, let's touch base and talk about my expectations for this particular part of your paper. So when you have a counterargument, you want to take a few different steps when it comes to drafting this paragraph. So the first step is to identify and then describe an opposing viewpoint to your own. I do want to make sure that you guys have a source for this. So if you have this information in a source you've already found, great, use that. If not, you are going to want to find a group or an individual or kind of just a general viewpoint that contradicts what you are saying in your essay. So for example, if we go back to my topic of the government paying for the first 2 years of college, the most obvious opposing viewpoint is that the government should not pay for any college. Individuals should pay their own way, with the exception of grants and scholarships that are funded by the government. And this then I would describe and kind of explain the reasoning, right? Many individuals believe that since they had to pay for their own schooling, that the current generation should have to do the same, arguing, right, that you're not going to value college as much if you're not paying for it yourself. You might take it less seriously. You might not do as well academically. So that paying for college in the opposing viewpoint's eyes is sort of what gives it that value for the individual student. So I may have a source or an interview quote from someone who had this viewpoint to explain part of the opposing side there. Another counter argument I could take is that the government should provide more grant money and more loan money to students. So again, it's not a directly opposing viewpoint to mine, but it doesn't go quite as far as my viewpoint of the government paying for those first 2 years of college. So then in the same paragraph, I want to explain why that opposing viewpoint is less correct, accurate, or true than my argument that the government should pay for 2 years of college. So there's two ways you can do this. You can kind of completely reject the other viewpoint and provide your reasoning, or you can kind of say, all right, this other viewpoint has some good points, but my argument is still superior. If I was refuting people who say the government should not pay for school, that individuals should pay for it, I might point out the fact that, well, this is a fair point, but the price of college has increased dramatically. I could give some statistics that have shown that increase in college tuition rates over time. I could again talk about how the college student debt is much higher than it used to be, right? So we can't kind of use that historical way of thinking about college because we don't have those historical prices for college tuition anymore. So that'd be one way of kind of showing why that viewpoint is wrong. If I was looking at that second one, I might say, okay, it is true that the government could just give more grants and loans, but what about students that don't qualify for those, but still may be facing a large amount of debt once they leave college? So it might help some students, but paying for those first 2 years would help more students or a larger body of students. Then the last step you're going to want to think is where to put this. So you really could put it anywhere in the essay, but the logical idea is to often put it after the first body paragraph. If you've got a topic where you're kind of explaining some background information in paragraph 2 and 3, then maybe you want that counter argument and refutation to be paragraph 4. This is kind of where I like to put it because again, it presents and shows that you're thinking about the other side, but it's not going to take away from the strength of your argument if it comes at the end of your paper. That is another spot you can put it. So you can put it at the conclusion of your essay. Again, though, then that's kind of like the last thing your reader remembers, so do you really want to distract them from your argument at the very end of the essay? But depending on your topic, it might work really well there. And then you could also put it after a related body paragraph. So let's say I'm talking about why the government needs to fund 2 years of college, and I then talk about, I may have a paragraph that's describing how much student debt students actually have. Then it might make sense for me to put my paragraph about the opposing viewpoint right after that one because they're kind of connected. So now I have two example ones here in this sheet, which I will post on Blackboard. So the first topic was talking about body cameras. So in that first sentence, my author very clearly identifies the other group. Some members of society are completely against body cameras in general. Then the person brings in a quote from their source. According to Matt D'Angelo, people who are against body cameras form questions such as how these expansions are going to limit citizens' personal freedoms. Author goes on to describe sort of more of that viewpoint, bringing in the Fourth Amendment, how that's a fear that a lot of people against body cameras have. And again, here the author has decided to say, all right, no, there is some truth to this argument, but the author then goes on to give examples of how we've been recorded in our lives without our permission in many different ways. This author is kind of using an example approach to refute the counter-argument. So he talks about looking at the news, how people are often recorded in the background of newscasts, how we're being monitored in stores, we're being monitored for traffic violations, Snapchat, how we might be recorded in the background of an image. So again, it's kind of a different way of approaching the counter-argument. It may not be as strong or logical because there's not a lot of sources and facts backing it up, but it does clearly show situations where we are recorded without our permission, tying into the argument that the person is trying to make against that counter-argument. And then he does do a nice job of wrapping up and kind of reminding us, all right, these examples show that everyone gets recorded on an everyday basis. so body cameras wouldn't limit someone's freedom. And another example we have here was about a student who was talking about why we should put some rule changes into football to protect players from head injuries. And he identifies, right, that many coaches and NFL representatives think we should leave the sport the same because that's how it's always been played. He also says that players know what they're getting themselves into. Again, we see this author bring in a nice piece of evidence from one of his sources to explain that opposing viewpoint. And then again, like the other one, we have a nice transition into that refutation. So you want to kind of think of this paragraph as the beginning is that counter argument describing it. Then we transition into our refutation of why it's less correct or less true than our own viewpoint. And then again, very clearly defining there are ways to prevent these injuries and keeping the game the same as it is now, right? Better equipment is going to make players safer, but isn't going to change the game mechanics. Some rule changes might change the game a little bit, but won't ruin the essential nature of football, right? Talks about how college and high school level football players be taught better fundamentals of hitting. So proposing a lot of different solutions that this particular author talked about earlier in his paper, which is why he's not necessarily citing them again here. So this example is a little bit more concrete, a little bit more logical of here's reasons X, Y, and Z, why we can still change the rules of football, but have the game remain the same. So for this week's in-class writing, you're going to be identifying a counter-argument, finding a source for it if you don't have one, writing 4 to 5 sentences of the counter-argument, then providing about 5 sentences at least of refutation. You're welcome to have more, but we kind of want to aim for a good-sized paragraph for this to really show the depth of our understanding the other side and also refuting that other side.